The silence began like a whisper and then grew into something terrifying. At 30,000 feet, the roar of engines that always hummed beneath a flight suddenly stopped. The passengers felt it before they fully understood it. An unnatural stillness, a shift in the air, a fear that clawed its way through the cabin. Panic spread in every direction. People clutched the seats, children cried, and the flight attendants tried to keep their voices steady as they hurried down the aisles. It was chaos wrapped in silence, the kind of silence that carries the weight of the unthinkable. In row 17 sat a young girl, only 16 years old, who should have been invisible to the story unfolding. But fate has a way of choosing its heroes, and soon, when all hope seemed lost, every eye, even those of the pilots, would turn to her. Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the extraordinary courage hidden in ordinary people, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Armed Forces Stories. These are the stories worth remembering. Her name was Emily Hayes, a teenager whose life had never been extraordinary. She lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing dramatic ever happened. Her father worked long hours, and her mother filled their home with warmth, but little else. Emily herself was shy, often overlooked at school, the kind of girl who blended into the background unnoticed. But there was one thing that set her apart, something few people even knew. Her grandfather had been a pilot. When she was younger, she spent endless hours sitting by his side in a small two-seater plane, listening as he taught her about instruments, controls, and the art of staying calm in the skies. She hadn't touched a plane in years, hadn't thought much about those lessons. Yet somewhere inside, they had never left her. As the minutes stretched on and the plane continued its silent glide, fear grew sharper. The captain's voice came through the intercom, shaking more than he intended. Something had gone terribly wrong. Both engines had failed, and though the crew was trained for emergencies, even they knew the odds were against them. A mechanical failure this severe at this altitude was nearly unrecoverable. The passengers sat in stunned horror, some whispering prayers, others frozen in disbelief. Emily could hear the words of her grandfather in her mind, soft but steady. In the air, panic is the enemy. Stay calm, trust what you know. Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed clear. She glanced toward the front of the cabin, and something inside her knew she couldn't sit still. The flight attendants were moving quickly, trying to calm passengers, but their own fear was showing. One of them stopped near row 17, her hands trembling as she reassured a mother with a baby. Emily felt her own hand rise, almost without thought, and she said words that surprised even herself. "I can help." The attendant looked at her, puzzled, almost dismissive. She was just a girl. But something in Emily's eyes, a quiet conviction, made the woman pause. Within minutes, Emily was led down the aisle toward the flight deck, her footsteps echoing against the carpet as passengers stared in disbelief. Every pair of eyes followed her, and she could feel the weight of hundreds of hopes pressing down on her young shoulders. Inside the cockpit, the scene was desperate. Warning lights blazed across the panels, alarms shrieked, and the two pilots were fighting to restart systems that refused to respond. Sweat dripped down their brows, their breathing heavy with exhaustion and dread. When the door opened and they saw a young girl step in, their first reaction was disbelief. But Emily didn't flinch. She looked at the instruments, the yokes, the chaos of blinking red, and somehow it felt familiar. She wasn't a professional, but the years with her grandfather had planted seeds that now bloomed under pressure. Her voice was soft but firm as she suggested steps she remembered from those long-ago lessons. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give the men a moment of pause, a chance to see her not as a child, but as someone who believed in possibility. The plane dipped, the pressure in the cabin tightening chests and filling ears. People screamed. The storm outside lashed against the windows, lightning flashing across a sky that seemed endless. Emily slid into the co-pilot's seat, her hands trembling only for a moment before finding their grip on the controls. The pilots exchanged a look, half fear, half faith, and they didn't stop her. Together, the three of them worked, voices steady against the chaos. The pilots barked instructions and Emily responded, pulling back on the yoke, correcting the roll, stabilizing the descent just enough to buy precious seconds. Her heart raced, but her focus was absolute. Every movement of her hands felt guided not only by memory but by something deeper, the belief that she could not let these people down. Back in the cabin, silence had returned. But it was a different silence now, hopeful, fragile, clinging. Parents clutched children tighter, passengers bowed their heads in prayer, and all waited for whatever came next. Through the thin cockpit door, they could hear muffled commands, the mechanical groans of a plane fighting to stay alive. Emily was no longer just a passenger in row 17. She was the thread holding them all together. Her knuckles were white against the controls, but her eyes never wavered. The plane descended lower, fields stretching out below through gaps in the storm, and a chance of survival emerged. The final moments felt eternal. The wheels scraped against the earth, the plane bounced hard, metal screeching, sparks flying. Passengers screamed, bracing themselves, but then the roar of contact softened into the grind of slowing momentum. The aircraft shuddered, rattled, and then, impossibly, it stopped, whole. Silence filled the cabin again, but this time it was a silence of disbelief, of gratitude too large for words. People sobbed openly, clutching each other, unable to process what had just happened. The pilots sat back in their seats, their chests rising and falling in exhausted relief. And both turned toward Emily with something that would never fade: respect. When she finally stepped out of the cockpit, the cabin erupted. Applause, tears, cries of thanks filled the space. Emily, her hair damp with sweat, her hoodie clinging to her, walked slowly down the aisle, feeling more eyes on her than ever before. But for the first time, she didn't shrink away. She had carried them through fear, through silence, through the edge of disaster, and into the light of survival. She was no longer invisible. She was proof that courage sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. And so, as this story reminds us, heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they sit quietly in row 17, waiting for the moment when they are needed most. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Armed Forces Stories. These are the stories we tell to remind ourselves that bravery can live anywhere, even in the hearts of those least expected. And before we end, I have a special request. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Tell us if this story moved you, or share your own story of an unexpected moment of courage. Your words might inspire someone else who needs hope.